All right, today's December 6th, St. Nicholas's Day. It's a Wednesday, I think, right? It's Wednesday. It's 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern time, so it's time for Latin studies. And what we're going to do today is study Latin nouns. We're going to look at Latin nouns together to learn about the forms of Latin nouns, because we've been doing Latin reading. And we're building our vocabulary, which is the goal of Latin Reading 1, just to build the vocabulary, not to get too much into grammar. But we're going to look at the declensions, the first declension of Latin nouns, and then we'll go look at the reading and we'll find some examples of first declension nouns so you can start paying attention to that. Then we'll finish translating lesson 3, which is John chapter 1, verses 11 to 15. I think we did verses 11 through 13 last time. We'll finish verses 14 and 15 today. And that'll probably be all the time we have. But if we do have some time left, we'll run through lesson 6 in vocabulary. All right? So that's that. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen. We're going to look at grammar. I'm going to keep chat quiet so you guys can focus and follow me with this. I recommend you take notes so that when you go off the meeting and get back to your lessons, you have some memory of what we talked about. And remember, when you take notes, I should say this before I share my screen. When you take notes, the purpose of notes is not just to write down what's in the lesson or just to write down what the teacher says. It's also to jot down things that you think about during the lesson. All right. So if a question comes to mind, or if, let's say, I use a certain word and you don't know what that word means, jot that down in your notes. Or if there's something in the book that you don't understand, write a question, write your question in your notes. If you're studying a lesson and it just leads you to think about something else, you say, oh, I've seen that word before. That's the kind of stuff, your own thoughts, your own questions, things like that. Your notes are not just a place to write out a summary of the lesson or take notes on the lesson. It's also to think. It's a place to record your own thoughts, your own questions, and so on. All right. So use your notes as a place where you work through a study, jot down important ideas, try to organize the lesson in your mind, and kind of talk to yourself as you study through the lessons. That's what your notes are really for. It's like a journal of your studies. All right. And you should always have, anytime you're studying, you should have notes out, just to jot things down, make notes to yourself, ask questions, and so on. All right. So having said that, I'm going to share my screen. I recommend you take some notes, and we'll move through this together. Let's get my screen shared here. Let's zoom in a little bit, not too much, or it won't be on the screen. That might be a little too much. All right, so what we're looking at here is our Latin grammar textbook. We're looking at the first declension of nouns. Over the past few weeks, when we do our translation work and stuff like that, I ask you to identify the part of speech of different words. We talk about conjunctions and nouns and verbs and things like that. It's good in Latin reading. It's good to build our vocabulary. That's our first goal in Latin reading, because you don't know any Latin words when you start. So you have to start just building your vocabulary. That's how you learned English, after all. You just started building your vocabulary by hearing your mother and your father and your family talking, or watching a movie, or driving down the road and learning to read signs and things like that. You just slowly build your vocabulary in your native language, little by little, month by month, year by year. Your vocabulary continues to grow. And when we study a new language, we have to do the same thing. We have to just start by building our vocabulary. We just have to learn words in a new language. So Latin reading, what's good about Latin reading is you learn Latin words, you build your vocabulary, but it's real reading. Some Latin programs, they'll have like fake reading for you to do. They'll come up with fake stories and stuff like that, or they'll give you vocabulary lists to learn. That's really not how we learn vocabulary. That's not how you learned English. You didn't learn by your mother, handing you a vocabulary list when you were 5 years old. You just learn by talking. You're just immersed in the language. You talk, you read, you watch movies, you watch shows, you learn songs, you say prayers. You just pick up vocabulary by being immersed in the language. So with Latin reading, we want to immerse ourselves in the real language, not fake Latin lessons and all that nonsense. We want to immerse ourselves in real Latin and learn real Latin vocabulary. We want to see the words in their context, in their real context, not like a dictionary study, because dictionary studies can lead us to use words in wrong ways. Like I might have talked about this before, but if someone is in China, let's say, and they want to learn English, so they just start reading through a dictionary and they start learning all these different words that are in the dictionary. In regular English, we don't use all those words that are in the dictionary. There's lots of words in the dictionary that we never use. And so if a person learns a language from a dictionary and then comes to our country to talk to us in English, and he's just pulling words that he found in the dictionary and not words that we use all the time, he's going to sound weird, and he's not really learning our language. He's not learning how we speak. He's just learning that this word means this and this word means this, and then he's stringing all these words together when he tries to make a sentence, and that's just not how we talk, right? There's lots of different words for different ideas, and when we talk day by day to each other, we use certain words. There are certain words we prefer, and there are other words that mean the same thing, but we just don't use them, and that's called usage. That's why it's good to build vocabulary by actually reading real Latin, for example. If you want to learn Spanish, it's great if you can immerse yourself in Spanish language. If there are Spanish-speaking people around you and you can just have them talk to you just the way your mother did when you were a little baby. That's a great way to learn language, by immersion. Some people travel to other countries and live in other places for a time to learn a language by immersion. That's great. But if you can't do that, the way that you can immerse yourself in a language is by reading that language, by doing translation exercises and learning the language by reading. And if you do that, you can learn any language. You can learn any language by immersion through reading. And one of the best places to learn languages is to use the Bible, because the Bible's been translated into every language in the world. So if you want to learn French, you can practice reading a French Bible. If you want to learn Italian, you can practice reading an Italian Bible, on and on through all languages. So that's what we've been doing in Latin reading, just building our vocabulary, building a real Latin vocabulary. But in Latin reading, you're told what the words mean. You're told what the translation is, and you just basically study it, learn it, and then repeat it on the assessments. In order to understand the language, in order to understand why the translation is the way it is, or in order to learn to translate things that I'm not telling you the translation for, like if you want to read something else, you're going to have to build your vocabulary. That's the first thing. And you're going to also have to learn grammar. You're going to have to learn the grammar, because the forms of the words tells you how to translate or interpret the Latin words and come up with the translation. So we've got to do both. We've got to study Latin reading to build our vocabulary and learn real Latin words that are really used by Latin-speaking people. And then we've got to study grammar so we can learn the forms and use our knowledge of the forms to translate the language, all right? The reason why I start with the Latin Bible in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy is that all the students, just about all the students in the academy, are Catholics. And so I know that you're familiar with the content of the Bible. You might not study the Bible all the time, but I know you're going to Mass, you're hearing readings, you're familiar with the content, and it's good to learn to translate and read readings that you're already familiar with, okay? So that's why we start with the Bible, and you learn the translation by me telling you the translation, and you trust me, right? When you study, you trust that I'm right. But over time, you know, you're going to need to translate and read things that I'm not going to tell you the translation for, and maybe no one else is going to tell you the translation for. Maybe they've never even been translated before, And the only way you're going to be able to do that kind of work, and again, obviously, most of you are not going to choose to do that in your life. Hopefully, some of you will, but those of you who desire to go further and further in the language, if you learn the grammar, you can take up books you've never seen before, maybe that have never even been translated before, and you can read them. You may wonder, what in the world exists that wasn't already translated? And you'd be surprised. There's lots of stuff, lots of important stuff that's never been translated. For example, in a recent class that I teach adults in the evening, the works of Saint Albert the Great, who's one of the most important Catholics in the history of the church. He's got tons and tons of books and commentaries that he's written, and almost none of them have ever been translated. So if you can't read Latin, you can't read Saint Albert the Great. And there are a lot of important works like that. So depending on what you're interested in, depending on where your studies go, you're going to be limited by languages. And even as you go through college, if any of you want to be a teacher or a professor or a researcher or anything like that, other researchers, especially in history, wrote in other languages. And you're going to have to be able to learn languages in order to read what other researchers and scholars and experts have written. So languages become very important, especially if you want to work in academic fields or research or sciences. You really have to learn to read other languages. Not everyone is working in English. Okay? So we have to learn grammar in order to be able to translate and understand languages. So we've been learning parts of speech in Latin reading. We learned to identify words as nouns and verbs and so on. But now it's time for us to start getting into that in a little more detail. So we're going to start studying the grammar, and then we'll go back to our Latin reading and we'll put it to practice. We'll look at examples of what we study in the grammar, and I think it's really the most helpful way to learn it. All right. So what we're going to look at first of the parts of speech, we know that there are a bunch of parts of speech. Different grammar books differ on the number just because they organize them in different ways. But normally we say there are 8 parts of speech in Latin, and you should be able to name them, or at least most of them. I'll open up chat for a minute and I'll ask you to name for me. What are some of the parts of speech? Give me some of the parts of speech, just the names of them. What are some parts of speech? Just list them. You could just type one at a time. It's okay. Just kind of flood me with parts of speech here. Noun, verb, pronoun, preposition, participle. No, James, those are cases. Those are not parts of speech. Adjective, pronoun, verb, article. Yeah, article in Greek and English. Let's go. I've seen some basic ones. Verb, adjective, noun, conjunction I just saw. Keep going. Pronoun, participle, good. Preposition, good. Substantive is a kind of noun. Good. So you get the idea, right? Those are parts of speech, okay? Interjection. Thanks, Joseph. I was waiting for that one. Adverb. Good, Jackson. That's another one no one mentioned. Okay, good. So those are the parts of speech. Very good. Those are the parts of speech. So you know what I'm talking about. Now, the reason why it's important to learn the parts of speech and to be able to identify them is once we can identify the part of speech, then we can start to think about the grammar of that part of speech. So I said, I don't know if it was in this class or in Greek class, but the parts of speech divide into 2 different kinds. There are declined parts of speech and undeclined parts of speech. Declined parts of speech are parts of speech that have different forms. So they're more complicated, like nouns and verbs and pronouns. They have different cases. They're called declined, and I'll just write the word so you... Declined parts of speech. They have different forms. And then there are undeclined parts of speech, which only have one form. So for example, a preposition, a conjunction, an interjection, an adverb, there's just one form. It's basically vocabulary. You learn the word and that's it. That's what you learn what it means, and that's all. But the declined parts of speech are complicated because the translation is built into the form of the word, and you have to understand what the forms mean. It's like a secret code. So we have to study that. So when we get to nouns, the first part of speech, nouns are divided into different families, and these different families are called declensions. So just like you are divided into different families and you've got a last name that identifies you, maybe you've got some physical features that, you resemble your family members, and some people might be able to identify you, but your last name identifies your family you belong to. And then your brothers and sisters and your parents all share that last name. That's a family, right? Identified by your last name. Well, when we look at Latin nouns, there are families of Latin nouns. They're called declensions. So each declension is like a family of nouns, and they have certain characteristics that we use to identify them. So we've got to learn what these different families are. And then when we see a noun, we've got to ask ourselves, which family does this noun belong to? And there are ways for us to tell that. So we've got to be able to identify the family that a noun belongs to. And then once we identify the family, we can learn the forms for that family. And we can know that those are the forms of that noun. So we don't have to memorize thousands and thousands and thousands of different forms. It's much easier than that. We just have to memorize 5 sets of forms for 5 different families. And then when we see a noun, we just have to figure out what family that noun belongs to, and those will be the forms for that noun. So it's really not that complicated. But we've got to learn the different groups, and like I said, they're called declensions. So on your screen here, you should be able to see the first declension of nouns. And what we see here, and this is what you should pay attention to, we see that there's an example noun. Now, what you should do is memorize the example noun. You don't need to memorize all the forms of all the nouns. You need to memorize an example, because the other nouns in that family will be like the example. So if you memorize the declension, if you memorize the forms of mensa here, any other first declension noun like mensa will have the same forms. So you'll just need to think of mensa when you look at other first declension nouns. So this is called an example noun. You should memorize the examples. And if you go through Latin grammar, you're going to get to this lesson. You should memorize the example noun in all of its forms with its translations, and then use that knowledge to recognize other first declension nouns and translate them. So you only have to memorize the example and then use the example to figure out everything else. So mensa is our first example noun for the first declension, okay? And if we read about the first declension here, we read the first declension, so the first family of nouns, the stem of the noun ends in the vowel A. The stem ends in A. So that's how we identify the first declension. The stem ends in A. So if we look at mensa, we're going to see the noun in the nominative form here, and then we're going to see the endings added to it. We see mens AE, mens AE for the dative, mens AM, mensa for the vocative, mensa for the ablative case. So we can see that the stem ends in A. That's how we identify the family. Now, the best way to identify the declension is to look at this second form here. You see the genitive singular form. If you look at the genitive, that's what the G stands for, and you see SG over here, that means singular. The genitive singular form, if you look at the ending AE, that's how you actually identify the first declension of nouns. Their genitive singular case ends in AE. That's the real way to identify them. You can try to identify them in other ways, but that's really not how you identify them. For example, if I looked at your family and I said, oh, I can tell this family because they all have brown hair, and then lo and behold, there's one kid who has blonde hair, right? So it might work most of the time, but there are exceptions. So the way to actually identify the family of nouns, the first declension, is by the genitive singular form. You'll see AE in the genitive singular. That's how you identify the declensions. That's how you identify all the declensions, by their genitive singular form, okay? So the stem of a first declension noun ends in A, and the example noun is mensa. So you'll see these endings in your Latin reading. You'll see AM, you'll see AE, you'll see A. Now you understand what they actually mean. They're different cases or different forms of first declension nouns. And you'll see these are the singular forms, and you see the 6 cases here: nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, vocative, ablative, the 6 cases. And then down on the next page, you see the plural forms. All right, so we see all the forms of the first declension noun. So let's take a minute, let's go away from this, and let's look at Latin reading, and let's just identify some first declension nouns. I don't like that this is in italics. It makes it a little more difficult to read, but we're tough enough to figure that out. Here's an example of a first declension noun: gloriam. Okay, you see the noun gloriam? You see it's got an A in its stem and it ends in am here. Gloriam. So just get that in your head real quick. Gloriam. Now, if we hop back over to grammar, we can see mensam in the accusative case right here. You see it ends in am, just like gloriam. So gloriam is in the accusative case, just like mensam. And if you had mensa memorized with all of its forms, you would know mensam is the accusative singular form. And when you see gloriam, you would know what that is. You would think mensam, you'd recognize it in gloriam, you'd know it's the accusative case, and that would help you to know how to translate gloriam. These different cases, in case you haven't studied any grammar yet, these different cases tell you what the function of the word is in the sentence. What is the word doing? The nominative case is the simple name. It's usually used when that word is the subject of a sentence. So the nominative case is usually the subject of the sentence. The genitive case identifies possession. You'll see that it's translated with the phrase of. So mensai is translated of the table. In the first declension, AE is also used for the dative case, though, so it can be a little confusing. They're the same ending. The dative case identifies what's called an indirect object. So if I say, I give a gift, right? I is the subject, give is the verb, gift is the direct object. But if I say, I give a gift to my wife, that expression, to my wife, to, that's the dative case. All right. So if I see a noun in the dative case, I know that it's the indirect object, like I give a gift to my wife. All right. So I do something, there's an action, I give. What do I give? I give a gift, but I give it to my wife. So she's indirectly the object of that action. The gift is the direct object of that action. My wife is the indirect object of that action, okay? So the dative case marks the indirect object, and you can see the translation in the lesson. It's translated as to or for, like I made a cake for my son, right? That's an indirect object. That's the dative case. So the cases teach us how to translate the nouns. So when we see of the table, there's no word in Latin that's going to be translated of. This form is translated of the table. There's no word in the Latin that's going to represent for the table. When we see the dative case, that tells us to translate it as for the table. So we've got to identify the cases to know the translation. Then we have the accusative case, where we have mensam here, just like gloriam, we just saw in the reading. The accusative case identifies the direct object. So I give the gift. Gift is the direct object of the action of the verb. I give the gift. I make the cake. Cake is the direct object of the verb. That would be marked with the accusative form in Latin. So the forms show us how exactly the words are being used in the sentence, and that's what we use to translate the sentence into English, because in English, we don't use forms like that. In English, we don't use forms like that. Just stop with the raising hands. There's nothing to talk about. In English, we don't use forms like this. We actually use those phrases like of the table, to the table, and so on. Or we use word order. We put the subject first, then we put the verb, then we put the direct object. In Latin, you don't need to do that because the forms tell us the meaning. So it's a little more, no, I wouldn't say complicated. It's just different. Okay. It's just a different way of communicating. Then here we have the vocative case. The vocative case is used when we speak to something directly. So if I call your name, if I say, hey, Melissa, Melissa would be put in the vocative case because Melissa is being spoken to directly. So we know that Melissa, we're not talking about Melissa, we're talking to Melissa. We're saying, hey, Melissa. That's the vocative case, okay? And they give you an example here, which is kind of dopey. They say, oh, table, like you're talking to the table. Yeah, very dramatic, right? Yeah. Hello, table. Good morning. If you wanted to address the table, you would use the vocative case, all right? So yeah, some of the examples are going to be silly, but they're just showing you what the meaning of that case is. And then lastly, the last case is the oblative case. Now, the word oblative means from a source, right? It means from something. So it usually has this idea of from. You can see from is one of the translations, but then you'll see there's a big list with, by, and so on. And it could go on for many more. There's lots of different possible translations of the oblative case, but usually the oblative case has a preposition before it that tells us how to translate it, okay? And I'll show you examples of that. Usually, the oblative case has a preposition before it that tells us how to translate it. So you need to know the 6 cases and what they show us because they tell us how to translate the noun. But these are examples of the first declension. So we have mensa is the nominative singular. Mensai is the genitive singular. Mensai is also the dative singular. Mensam is the accusative singular. Mensa, the vocative. Mensa, notice a long A at the end for the ablative. That's the only difference. It's just a longer A. Mensa would be the ablative form. And those are the singular forms. Then when we go to the plural forms, we see mensai again. So we saw mensai was the genitive singular. Mensai was the dative singular. Now we see mensai can also be the nominative plural. Mensai can also be the nominative plural. Let me ask you in the chat here, if mensai has 3 different possible translations, how in the world do I figure out which translation to use? How do I figure that out? Do I just take a wild guess? Very good. I use context, right? I use context, not process of elimination. I use context, okay? So when we translate, this is important because if you ever try to translate something, you'll start and you'll say, oh, I don't know, I can't figure it out. Well, that's part of translation. There's no way to just, usually there's no way to just figure it out. It takes some work because sometimes there's no way to know how to translate something. You've got to get a general idea of what the sentence is about first, and then use that general idea to answer some of the questions about how to translate things in the sentence. So you need to do both of those things, okay? So if you just sit down and look at Latin, you say, oh, I don't know, I can't read it. Well, that's really not how translation works. You've got to work through the whole sentence, try to get a general idea of what it's about, and then use that to start making decisions to translate different parts. And then as you keep working, it'll get clearer and clearer and clearer until you finally are satisfied with the translation. So mensai can have 3 different translations. And we know that we would figure that out by looking at the context. So for example, here it's plural. Well, we can tell if the subject that's being talked about is plural in a sentence, then we would know that it's probably mensai. Okay, it's probably the nominative plural here. And we translated tables. Then we have mensarum. Arum is the ending. Arum, that's genitive plural. It's genitive, so we translate it of, and it's plural, so it's of the tables with an S at the end. Of the tables, mensarum. The dative case in the plural is mensis, so you see the is ending. That would be translated to or for the tables. The accusative plural is mensas, So that would be the direct object because it's an accusative case. But because it ends in as, it's plural. So we translate the tables with an S at the end. Then the vocative would again be mensai. So notice the nominative and the vocative are the same. We'd have to use context to figure out the translation. So O tables, if you're now addressing many tables, you would use the plural there. And then the ablative plural is the same as the dative plural. It ends in is. So the ablative and the dative have the same endings. And we would, again, use context to figure out how to translate them. So those are the endings for first declension nouns. When you get to grammar, when you get to this in grammar, you should memorize the declension of mensa and all of the translations. You should memorize the forms, and you should memorize all of the translations and then use them to translate all first declension nouns. So you just have to memorize one time and then use that knowledge to translate. Now notice that these cases are in a certain order: nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, vocative, ablative. You have to be careful to always list the cases in the same order, so that you can then just memorize the forms in that order and you know which case is which, and it's always the same, all right? So the nominative is always first, the genitive is always second, the dative is always third, accusative is always fourth, vocative is always fifth, ablative is always sixth. So you can just memorize those forms in order and know which case is which by keeping the order always the same, all right? So they're always written in the same order. And if you find a grammar textbook that changes the order, throw it in the garbage, because that's gonna make you confused about the forms. Always keep it in this same order, all right? Nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, vocative, ablative. Then you can just memorize the forms. You don't have to say to yourself, the nominative form is mensa and the genitive form is mensa. You don't need to memorize more words. You just keep the order the same and just memorize the forms, okay? So that's that. That's my dumb person voice, by the way. I know some of you like my voices. That's my dumb person voice, okay? All right. So that's the first declension, and you'd have to memorize that, learn these forms. But for now, you can just use the grammar book as a reference and then keep an eye out for them as you read. So let's look at the reading here. I said before, gloriam is an example of a first declension noun. So if I asked you what part of speech is gloriam, you'd say noun. It's a substantive noun. And then if I said, okay, what else can you tell me about it? You could look at it and say, all right, I recognize that ending. That's an accusative case ending. It's a singular accusative case ending. So gloriam is a direct object of a verb, and that's what it actually is in this sentence. We see, and we saw the glory. So glory is the direct object of the verb. That's why it's written in the accusative case. So you can see how the language works, all right? So there we see gloriam, first declension noun. We see the stem is A. We see it ends in am. That's the accusative case. That's one example. Here's another example. Here we see gratiae, gratiae. And we saw when we looked at the grammar that the AE ending actually marks a number of different forms. So we said that the only way we can know to translate that is by context. And that leads to some confusion, because you can say, well, how in the world can I know the context if I can't translate the words, right? And the answer is that you'll usually be able to translate most of the words, especially the simple ones like the nominative form, the verb, the accusative form. They're usually pretty simple. The ones that are difficult are usually the other ones. So we can already get an idea of the translation before we have to figure out some of the more complicated forms. But gratiae in classical pronunciation, or gratiae in church pronunciation, gratiae can be genitive singular, it can be dative singular, it can be nominative plural, or it can be vocative plural, all right? So there's a number of different possible translations of gratiae. We know that the word gratia, if we look it up in the dictionary, you're going to see the nominative form of the noun. If we look it up, we'll see that it means grace. So we know the idea of the noun. It means grace, but we've got to figure out exactly how to translate it. So we look at the context. I'll open the chat here for a second. We look at the context and we see plenum gratiae or plenum gratiae. What does plenum mean? Who knows what plenum means? Think of Ave Maria gratia plena, right? Same word. Plenum means full. All right, good. Plenum means full. And then we have gratiae, and we know that it means grace, but we've got to figure out how to translate it because this form could have a number of different translations. And you can see how the context tells us how to translate it. Does everybody see that? The context tells us how it should be translated, all right? And that's right, it's a genitive case. The only reason we know it's a genitive case is because of the context. We have this adjective full, we have the adjective full, and we know that when we use the adjective full, we usually say of what is something full. It's full of water, it's full of dirt, full of grace, right? That's how we use that adjective plenum or full of something. So when we have that adjective full, we're going to expect that it's followed by a genitive case that expresses the idea of something. So that's how we figure that out. So we can see its first declension. We can know what the basic idea of the noun is from the dictionary. We know it means grace. But to figure out exactly how it should be translated, we have to look at the context, and you can see how that works. Full of grace, okay? All right, so that's how it works. So we see one example in gloriam, an accusative. It's the direct object of the verb. We saw the glory. It's the direct object of that verb. Then down here, we see another example. We see gratiae, which is a genitive case that follows the adjective full of grace. So we've got two examples there. Let me see if I can find another. Sometimes there are a bunch of first declension nouns. Let me just look real quick. Look around here. We can look at propria, but propria is misleading because it's actually not a first declension noun. So just because it ends in A doesn't mean it's first declension, okay? It's like if I say your family has brown hair and then I go find somebody else that has brown hair and I say, oh, you must be from the Smith family because you have brown hair. It's true that all the Smith family members have brown hair, but that doesn't mean that somebody else with brown hair is Smith family, okay? So just because a noun has an A at the end does not mean it's first declension. And I'll show you real quick what that is. So if you look at propria, and you see it ends in A, and you say, I think Mr. Michael's lying to us. He's telling us that it's not first declension. Close your eyes as I scroll real quick. If we go down to the second, let me see if I can find this here. Yeah, here's an example. Okay, you can open your eyes now. I'm done scrolling. Look over here. This is the second declension. You can see that the noun here is bellum. You see my cursor? Bellum. Bellum up here. It's second declension family, and it's a neuter noun, bellum. It ends in um. But if we look down at the plural form, what do you notice about the plural form? Give me the plural form. Type it to prove that you're looking at what you're supposed to be looking at. What do you notice about the plural form? It ends in an A, right? So just because it ends in A does not mean it's first declension, because there are second declension neuter nouns in the plural that end in A. So it's not that simple, okay? So just because a noun ends with an A doesn't mean that it's a first declension noun, just because your family has brown hair and I find somebody on the road with brown hair, I don't bring him to your house and drop him off. And because, you know, he has brown hair, he must be your family member. That doesn't mean anything. Okay? So just because they end in A, that doesn't mean they're first declension. So in this passage here, propria even though it ends in A, is not first declension. So don't be tricked by that. Let me ask you this. Josephine, you're making sure that everyone follows the chat rule while you're the one chatting. So don't do that, okay? If you were just model quietness on the chat, you'd be a great example for everybody else, okay? Let me ask you this question real quick. What was I going to say? Oh, how do we identify a first declension noun? What do we actually look for to identify a first declension noun, or any noun, any declension? What do we look for? The genitive is good. Yeah, the genitive singular is perfect, right? Okay. Now, yeah, so the genitive singular form we look, not just the singular form, not just the genitive form, the genitive singular form. The genitive singular identifies what family or what declension a noun belongs to. Now, Zoriana asked a question that I want to answer real quick. Zoriana wrote, is veritatis a first declension noun? She's talking about this word right here, veritatis. Now, veritatis is not a first declension noun, but it's kind of confusing because look, it ends in is. And we saw, scrollophobia alert. Close your eyes for a second. Okay. The dative and ablative plural, if you look in the first declension, they end in is. So if we look at veritatis, we say, oh, it ends in is. That must be first declension, dative or ablative plural. No, that's not how it works. Because if we look back at the grammar, I'm going to scroll down to the third declension. Scroll down to the third declension. When we get to the third declension, scroll. Okay, here we are. You can open your eyes now. If you look at the third declension, you look here, the genitive singular ending is is. Okay, so the genitive singular ending in the third declension is is. So that is that we see in veritatis, I know this because of experience. Veritas is a third declension noun. It ends in is in the genitive singular case. That's why we have full of grace, genitive form, full of grace and of truth, full of grace and of truth. So the reason why I translate gratiae, of grace, is because it's the genitive form of the first declension. And the reason why I translate veritatis, of truth, is because it's the genitive case of the third declension. Okay, so gratiae and veritatis have the same case. They're the same case, and they have the same translation in the sentence. It's of grace, and of truth. But because they're two different families of nouns, the genitive ending for gratia is gratiae, first declension, and the genitive form of veritas, third declension, is veritatis. So they're the same case, but they have different endings. So even though the endings are different, it doesn't mean that they're different cases because they belong to different families, all right? So you can see how that's a little confusing, but when you learn all of the declensions, and there are just 5 of them, not a million, when you learn all the declensions, you'll look at veritatis and you'll say, well, you know what? That could be first declension. It could be dative plural or ablative plural, first declension, but it could also be genitive singular, third declension. And you'll just know of what the different possibilities are, and then you can figure it out. You can look it up in the dictionary. If you look at that word up in the dictionary, you won't find veritatis, but what you'll find is something like this. Sorry, I'm just typing this real quick. You'll find this in the dictionary. Veritas, veritatis, it means truth. And as you learn the declensions, you'll know that this is showing you that veritas is a third declension noun. because the ending is in the genitive singular, the is ending in the genitive singular marks the third declension. The dictionary tells you that. Anytime you look up a word in a dictionary, it will give you two forms for the word, or the noun, I should say. It'll give you the nominative form of the noun, and it will tell you the genitive form of the noun, because that's how you identify what family it belongs to. So if you look up the word gloria in the dictionary, it will give you this. That's what the Latin dictionary will tell you. It will tell you gloria means glory, and the genitive singular ending is ae, and that tells you its first declension. All right. If you look up gratia in the dictionary, it will show you that. It will show you gratia means grace. That's the idea of the noun. And it will also show you the genitive form for the noun and tell you that's first declension. So it will give you that information. If you look up another word like propria, you won't find it. You won't find propria. You'll find this. I'll show you what you're going to see if you look up propria. That's what you would find in the dictionary. Proprius, propria, proprium, because it's actually an adjective. And so they'll give you the three different forms of the adjective, the masculine form, the feminine form, and the neuter form. So that's a little different because it's a different part of speech. So what the dictionary shows you is going to be different. But when you look up a noun, you'll always be given the nominative form and the genitive form so you can identify the declension, okay? So that's how that works. So sometimes you'll see words that look the same and they're not, and then other times you'll see words that look different and they're the same. So for example, propria looks like a first declension noun, but it's not. Gratiae and veritatis are the same case, but they look different. So you can't just go by looks. You have to actually know the dictionary. You have to know the grammar, sorry. You have to know the grammar, okay? So that's that. So the first declension of nouns, scroll, 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 scroll. The first declension of nouns, the stem ends in A, the genitive singular is AE, and the example noun is mensa, all right? Mensa. And this tells you everything. It tells you the nominative form is mensa, it's a feminine noun, it means the table, and then you see all of its forms. So eventually you're going to have to memorize the forms of the nouns, and then you're going to have to memorize the forms of adjectives and of pronouns and of verbs and participles, and then you're done. All right, so lots of memorizing, not too much though, a lot, but you know, it's not endless, but you've got to get through that to learn grammar. So keep working in grammar, keep working through grammar. I'm going to keep adding more and more lessons, but even if the lesson's not available, just keep studying the book, because that's all we're going to do is study the book, okay? We'll talk about it in our live class meetings, and then you can study it on your own. And you should be always asking yourself, when you look at these lessons in reading, and you see my translation, like I translate this as full of grace, you should ask yourself, why? Why did Mr. Michael translate this of grace? Why did he translate it like that? And you'll see the answer is in the grammar, okay? The answer is in the grammar, okay? All right, so that's that. I don't think my, usually, just so you know, my internet is usually pretty strong. So if you're having problems with glitches and stuff like that, it's probably not my side. My internet speed is really crazy. It's like 600, megabaud per second. You only need like 10 to conduct a meeting, all right? So it's usually not my side, just so you know. Okay, so when you see the translations in the exposition, you can just be like, mindless dum-dum. You could just be mindless and learn it all. But what I want you to do is I want you to think about it and ask why. Why did Mr. Michael translate this the way he did? For example, you see this here and you see dedit is translated he gave. You see dedit is translated he gave. You should ask yourself, why did Mr. Michael translate it he, first of all? And why did he translate it past tense? Man, if I leave the chat open for 1 second, just obnoxious behavior. You're going to see the students who don't learn and don't make progress. They don't pay attention. It's not a mystery. If we look at this verb dedit, right? Dedit, and you see that I translated he gave. You should ask why. Why did he translate it he gave? Why did he translate it he and not she? Or why did he translate it he and not they? How did he figure out to translate it he? And why did he use a past tense verb? Why did he say gave instead of gives? So as you look at these translations, you should ask yourself why. Philios, Mr. Michael translated it as sons. He translated it as plural. Why did he do that? Why did he translate philios as sons in the plural? The answer is in the grammar. Why, when he sought Dei, why did Mr. Michael translate it of God? Why did he translate it of? So if you learn to study the translation, but also ask why, you'll start to be able to recognize the grammar. And if you go to the grammar book and just scroll around through the grammar book and challenge yourself to try to figure out why. Why did Mr. Michael translate philios as sons? And you scroll around, eventually you'll lose your sight, but it's all right. You'll find, oh, here we go. Look at this. In the second declension, I see that there's an ending that's os. That must be where philios comes from, and it's plural. So that's why Mr. Michael translated philios with plural sons and not singular. So if you do that, obviously, if you're trying to study as little as possible, you're not going to do that. But if you really want to understand it, just go and, scroll around through the grammar book when you see things and see if you can figure out why, because you'll be able to figure out why things are translated the way they are. All right. It's grammatical. I don't just sit here. I don't pray and wait for, an angel to tell me the translation. I don't just wing it and just take a guess. I look at the word. I know the grammar. So I know what this word means. I know philios, I know philius means son, and I know that os is an accusative plural form, so I know to translate it sons. I also know that because it's accusative, it's going to be the object of a verb. So I gather all of that information out of the grammar and I use it to make the translation. And if you argue with me and say, I think your translation is wrong here, you might be right. There might be another way to translate a certain phrase or a sentence that's better, or it might not be better, but it's also possible. So translation is debatable because you see there's lots of different forms, there's lots of different possible translations. So there's nothing wrong with debating a translation. This is also why translating the Bible for yourself can be dangerous, because God gave us the church to tell us what the right translation is. Some people will say, no, I don't think that's true. I think it's like this because the grammar doesn't teach us how to interpret it. The grammar just shows us what all the options are, right? Just because a translation's possible doesn't mean that that's the right translation. So the church, using theology, guides the translation so that the translation, when there's lots of options, we actually allow our knowledge of theology to help us interpret it and translate it the right way. So it's perfectly okay to debate a translation or to disagree or translate it in a different way if you've got a reason for that. But there are other things to consider, like the context, the history. You can say, well, I know about this period of history, so I know it wouldn't be translated like that. That wouldn't make any sense. It should be translated like this. So translation is always debatable. And as you study grammar, you'll see why it's debatable, because words can have a number of different meanings, forms can have a number of different translations, and so on. So there's room for disagreement in translation, but you've got to know grammar to even get into those issues. All right, so we're about out of time. I think that that's a pretty good introduction for the grammar, and a challenge for you to start asking why as you go through these Latin reading lessons. Remember, when you're getting started, You should be focusing on Latin reading so you can build your vocabulary. Otherwise, you don't even know what grammar is talking about. So I don't recommend you start with grammar. Just like when you were a little kid, you didn't start learning English by reading a grammar book. You learned by just being immersed in the language. And then once you start to build your vocabulary and you can identify the parts of speech, then it's time for you to start studying grammar. And some of you are at that point, some of you not yet. So focus on Latin reading. And as your vocabulary starts to build, start asking the question why when you look at these translations, and then flip around the grammar book and see if you can figure out why, and study grammar. Start studying Latin grammar so you can become the translator, and you don't need me to translate for you. You can grab anything. You can grab another book of the Bible. You can grab the writings of Julius Caesar or St. Thomas Aquinas, and you can translate it yourself. As long as you have the vocabulary and you understand the grammar, you'll be able to translate Latin, okay? So I hope that's helpful. A little guide through the grammar as we go through Latin reading. We'll just keep doing this week by week, but make sure you're coming to these live classes, you're paying attention, and after the classes end, you're turning around and getting to work and getting these assignments done. There's no reward for staring at your computer for an hour once a week. That doesn't mean that you're a Latin student. So don't go around telling Uncle Frank at Christmas time that you're a Latin student because you sit and stare at a screen for an hour on a Wednesday afternoon. Study the lessons, do the assignments, complete the quizzes, develop your understanding and prove your understanding. That's what this class is really for. It's just meant to help you with these studies. So you can go and do the online studies and make progress as quickly as possible. All right. So I'm going to stop sharing. That's all for today. So if you've got an important business meeting to get to, important business in the north, you're free to go. If you've got any questions about this, I'm happy to answer those questions. But that's all for today. So get to work, get the lessons done, and I'll see you guys next time. Make sure the recording's stopped here.